right. Hello. Welcome to VRDC 2016. My name is Justin Achilli. I am the lead social systems designer at Red Storm Entertainment, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Werewolves Within, which is our VR social deduction game title that's due out at the very beginning of December, so December 6th. Really looking forward to that. And real quick agenda here. First thing we'll be covering is coming up with a definition of social VR. I know it's a pretty hot term, but I want to give you a little bit of grounding in what I mean when I say it. Second, we designed Werewolves Within to specifically be for a social VR experience. So we'll go into some of the systems that we built for that. Then we'll go into some of the practical results that came out of our user testing. And finally, we'll finish with some takeaways. First, obviously, starting with a definition of social VR. This is AchilliCon 16. It happens twice a year at my house. A couple of us get together. We all come over. We bring board games, card games. You're all invited. Most of you are invited. Please bring a drink to share, bring a side dish. But the idea here is that we all get together. We all play games together. And so building on that idea, in a review of the Oculus Toy Box demo that came out last year, Popular Science said, virtual reality can potentially connect people around the world and let them inhabit the same immersive digital world, more closely replicating actually being together in real life. So again, that idea of, like AchilliCon, where you're all coming next year, we're all going to be together here in this virtual space. And then another quote here that I think is particularly relevant, consumer VR that can induce presence marks a phase change in the relationship between humans, computing, and information. And I predict that VR will be the most social medium ever. Michael Abrash, who's the chief scientist at Oculus, said that at Carnegie Mellon University a couple years ago. And really, we want to trade on that prediction, on that idea of being able to share that space just like we are here, but virtually. So that kind of gives us a good definition to move forward with. Social VR is a virtual world in which the sense of presence is enhanced when shared with other actual individuals. And I want to call attention to that word actual because we're not using social VR in this case to indicate AIs, bots, NPCs. Actual individuals like you, like me, like everyone else in this room, you're going to know that they're actually a person. So with that in mind, we'll talk about Werewolves Within and how it was specifically designed for social VR. We're not going to touch a whole lot of gameplay. We're going to focus on the interaction between the players. A quick introduction to the game. In the village of Galveston, one or more of the players are werewolves here around the table, and the townsfolk players are trying to figure out who the werewolves are. The werewolves know each other's identity. The townsfolk don't. And everybody gains information over the course of play. So how you use this information, the game revolves around sharing that information, what you hide, what you share, and the amount of trust that you're building with the other players. Obviously, if you're trying to find the werewolf and there's a secret werewolf or more in the group, you're going to not want to trust someone. So let's see it in practice here.
I'm not the gossip, and I just saw you.
It's totally Xavier. It's totally Xavier.
How's it totally Xavier? No, I think it may be Garrett. It must be. You're talking all this good. It may be Garrett.
I'm drifting. That's why I said
Prove it. How do you know?
Garrett. How do I know that? Because I can see it. Because
you can see it. It's also, it could be true or it could be false. I guess we're all picking Andrew.
Everybody pick Jacob. He's a wolf. I'm a saint. He's not. Yeah, I'm 110% sure. I'm 110% sure.
125.
Oh, we all know it's Andrew.
Oh my gosh, right? It's Jacob.
What's it even matter? We're all gonna die anyway.
Oh no! What are y'all doing? Oh God!
What does it matter? We're all gonna die. But that shows you a little bit. The player is going to be in the first-person perspective. There's seating around a circle. The players are gaining some sort of information, and at the end, they cast a vote for who they want to eliminate. The gameplay itself is an inherently social activity, building the game itself, started out with creating the experience of being together, sharing a space, and then layering the gameplay components on top of that social framework. So it's happening in a space that was built to be together in the first place. The game isn't secondary, but the game is built on top of this social foundation. And so you're going to see that a lot. You're going to see it in the box art. You're going to see it in the concept art here, where all the characters are together. It's reinforced in the setting, where you're all sharing a village in Galveston, or you're around the campfire, or you're in the castle together. It's in the lobby state of the game, so there's no choose a server sort of situation. You'll be put into a room, and before the game happens, you're actually still sitting around that circle with the other players. So you're seeing their avatars move in real time. It's all happening together from the get-go. The game itself emerged from a prototype. We had built a kind of secret heist prototype where the players were discussing who among them is going to backstab the group as they go in to steal something. And this really proved for us this sense of togetherness, of presence of the other players, made a believer out of me at the very least. I was a VR skeptic to begin with, and the moment I put on the HMD and I played that initial prototype, it made a believer out of me because I knew that other person was there. Going back to that quote earlier about the Oculus toy box demo, when you see that other person there playing with the toys or throwing the things around the environment, you know that that's another person. You know that that's not a logic tree. You know that that's an individual. And so our initial meeting with HQ, when we were pitching the game, we played it with them. They got in and we backstabbed each other and committed some treacheries. And we had the debrief meeting around the campfire. We stayed in VR around the campfire in the game to continue the meeting after the prototype gameplay session. And that to me was very much a proof of HQ believed in us and had that same kind of come to it moment where they realized that, oh, we are in the same space. This is better than conducting this call via Skype. The gameplay itself is also an inherently social endeavor. It's an idea, or the gameplay revolves around solving this information disparity. There are some secrets that need to be revealed. There are pieces of information that need to be revealed, and everybody has some amount of information, but no player has exactly the right amount of information to solve the puzzle. So here, the idea that sharing information and getting you to trust me is very important. It makes the game much more of a social deduction. Is Justin telling the truth and wants me to vote with him, or is Justin lying and trying to get me to vote for someone else? That breaks it away from purely a logical deduction sort of situation. It's not like Clue, where, oh, I didn't know I killed Professor Plum. You know, it's something where I know that I'm the werewolf and I'm trying to divert attention away from myself. It's also important that the game provides you a structured autonomy here. If you're familiar with self-determination theory or the Penn's model of games, you'll be familiar with the idea of autonomy. Here we give you the objective, find the werewolf, but we don't tell you how to do it. Do you want to do it by talking to other players? Do you want to do it by gesturing that you think another player is suspicious? Do you want to do it by building a coalition against somebody? Are you going to try to shift attention to someone who probably isn't the werewolf, but you've got some other motive? How you accomplish it is up to you, but that idea that here's what we want to do serves as the kind of icebreaker in the social space to get us talking. If you just put us in a room and say, talk, it requires a lot of volition on our part. Somebody's got to take that initial risk, right? But here, where talk among yourselves, share what you know, find the werewolves, then we have something we can start moving on right away. It's also built on the player using intuitive, familiar movements. The players move their avatars by performing things that they're going to do in the real world. So for example here, we've got players leaning over next to one another to whisper. In this case, this creates a private VoIP channel where only these two players will be able to hear each other. All the rest of us around the table will only hear pss, 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 pss. And the players perform this by literally leaning over left or right to the player next to them. So if I tell you, you control yourself by leaning to lean, that's fairly intuitive, right? You know how to lean. You can also stand up to perform a monologue. The way this works is the player stands and all of the rest of the players' VoIP is turned off. So I'm up here commanding that you listen to me. All of the rest of you can't speak. We did find out through testing that we needed to put a timer on that. Otherwise, a player would kind of run away with it. So you can do this for 10 seconds. But again, we're reading the tracking position of the HMD. So to stand up, you stand up. So all of these are intuitive, they're familiar, they don't require a complex series of commands, they're not nestled in menus, you don't have to dig them up. The players can also use very expressive emotes here. For example, pointing is on the right trigger. You can also do another variety of emotes that are bound to the D-pad on the controller that ships with. In this case, we've been testing on the Oculus, but obviously it'll work on the PlayStation VR as well, and also on the HTC Vive. But once you know where those controls are, they're easy to go back to. Again, they're not buried in menus. You don't have to open some subset of functions. You just do them. And so seeing these movements performed at the user's will, as opposed to them coming automatically as a result of logic tree, they really let you know that that's another person. When I point at you, it's because Justin is choosing to point, as opposed to 30 seconds into the game, logic dictates this character points. This goes back to something that Michael Abrash said in that same presentation at Carnegie Mellon. He was describing sharing a social space in VR, and his phrase was, all of a sudden, it was a person. Seeing that, that head that had moved up from the ground and started moving around as the person placed the AMD or HMD on their head and was turning around to look at things, that conveyed the ever elusive sense of presence that VR thrives on and trades on and really depends on. Some other systems that we've got in play are eye magnetism. This goes a huge way for us in fighting the uncanny valley. When characters look at one another, the eyes are automatically drawn to. I'm looking at you. I don't know why I singled you out. It's just convenient for me. So, but now our eyes are looking together, as opposed to me looking slightly over your shoulder and you feeling that, okay, this is kind of a bot here that's not looking at me. And also, when players look at one another, we duck the audio for anyone who's not those two players. So when I'm looking at you, you know that I want to focus on you and I'm hearing you at 100%. Everyone else is ducked to some lesser level. So these are nice simple ways of nonverbal communication, communicating that you have my attention. We also use a fairly elaborate lip sync process. We read the microphone input and we detect the phonemes of the words that you're speaking, and we translate those in real time to the players' faces. So when you see my mouth moving, you know that I'm one of the characters speaking. And in a lot of cases, you're not seeing this in models, or you're not seeing it done in real time. They just have a simple movement. But here, when you see the character speaking, when you see them gesturing, you know that this is someone who wants my attention, who's saying something that I potentially need to hear. Speaking about those gestures, body language itself conveys a huge amount of communication detail. What we do is we analyze the intensity of what you're saying, your speech coming into the mic. And if you're speaking fairly calmly, you'll perform some automated, what we're calling minor gestures here in the yellow box, where your hands will move fairly simply. But when you're really agitated and you're frustrated and why won't you vote for this werewolf, your hands start to move in this greater sense of area here that we have in the major gestures area. So the intensity, the volume with which you're speaking helps us translate that into gestures that make the avatar seem more alive. And then as well, we've confined the emotes to a higher plane, kind of a stack above where those gestures are happening. So at this point, you know that I'm consciously choosing to point at you, or I'm consciously choosing to say, you should make me the ringleader. The seating arrangement as well plays on some long-standing sociological knowledge. All of the seating arrangement in Werewolves Within is circular, and there's a reason for this. A circle doesn't have a head or a foot. It doesn't impart any sense of leadership, right? So leaders can absolutely emerge over the course of a match because a charismatic person is going to steer the way, or a very forceful person is going to make himself heard or herself heard. But there is no implied, this is the person you have to listen to in a circular table. As well, for each match, we shuffle the position of the players, so you're not always stuck sitting next to this guy and you know how he's going to play. Because we shuffle you every time, it's always that there's one more category of difference there between each session. Some players just don't like to whisper, but next game you'll be put next to a player who may be more receptive to your whispering. Players are also spaced, and I think this is a really important part, the players are also spaced with enough distance between them that they can't grief one another. It's not possible for me to lean in and put my hands in front of your face, and all of the gestures, all of the emotes that we have put in play as well, those are pre-recorded, those are established, those are defined, so we don't have any lewd gestures in there as well. In making sure that players are comfortable, making sure that we're not challenging anybody's boundaries of comfort or appropriateness, we didn't want people to be able to harass one another or to be able to make make one another feel like something inappropriate is happening. The stylized avatars, I'm sure you've seen as well. The characters' heads are pretty big. Their facial features are pretty big. Eyes are big. The mouths are big because we want you to be able to see when the players are speaking. The hands are large. They move emphatically. And all of this is kind of helping us. Because it's an avatar and not an exact representation of you proper, it helps the player feel a little more comfortable. It reduces some of the anxiety of sharing this social space. The players don't feel necessarily like they're on display. I'm going to give you a quote here from a journalist who reviewed our game a little bit. She said that Werewolves Within strips away the game's inbred anxieties and morphs it into something still social, but I dare say more fun. It's a digital mask to hide behind, making your deception a little bit more simple and your fellows' hunt a lot harder. So here's an example of this particular journalist has played actual physical around the table werewolf, and she doesn't like it. It makes her feel uncomfortable. It makes her feel like when she lies, she blushes. It's easy to catch her. But here, there's a level of remove that not only hides her physical cues, but kind of brings her out of her shell, inclines her to be less withdrawn. It's not me who's playing this, I'm the Moor. I'm not the one who's on display here, it's this wacky character in this kind of comical town. There's also another point here that I want to bring up from Oculus Connect a couple weeks ago. Ben Popper at The Verge saw the Facebook demonstration there and said, adding hands and facial expressions makes virtual reality a much more intimate medium. And we've definitely seen that here. The players really feel like they are sharing a space with actual people. They're not just kind of looking for the logical deduction. They're not following this path, like I said, of clue where they're going to get the answer. They feel like they're sharing a space. They need to build trust. And if they don't have that intimacy with another player, if they don't have that trust, they're going to have a hard time convincing those other players that what they think is true. Even if I know the answer, there is one role who finds out without fail who a werewolf is, but now if I'm that character and I am unable to convince you all of you, please vote for the werewolf. He's right here. If you don't trust me, I'm not going to get that vote. I appreciate you being the werewolf. Thanks for that. So that's all great theory. It's all great to kind of have that grounding there, but let's take a look a little at it in practice. We have our user research lab in North Carolina at Red Storm Entertainment headquarters. We also have a user research lab in Paris at Ubisoft headquarters, and so the data you're going to see here coordinates those two separate sessions there. We have more data from the US lab, but we did want to compare with other users as well. First of all is appreciation of the avatars. We saw overall that players really appreciated, kind of going back to that point that the journalist brought up about being able to represent oneself in the avatar. We also noticed that when the players didn't know each other's names, when they were, XYZ or Seat 5 or whatever, they would refer to each other by the avatar's characteristics. You saw one with a bushy beard. Sometimes you're the really hairy guy. Or there's a character who's wearing an eye patch, and they would call him One Eye. So these distinguishing characteristics that are built into the avatar don't quite feel like you're being mocked because it's not you. If you're calling me, the really bushy, hairy guy, well, that's because the avatar is hairy. Justin's not embarrassed. It's this poor blacksmith who is stuck in this town full of werewolves and for some reason refuses to move away. This goes back to that point about having the digital mask to hide behind. The victory conditions, in terms of the gameplay itself, we found that the werewolves win just over half the time. So remember that the werewolves are the uninformed, or they're the informed minority. The townsfolk are the uninformed majority. They're winning a little bit less, and that feels good to us. That was our design intent going into it, because we didn't want the players who felt like they were outnumbered to want to drop session. In fact, they win a few more, so you're kind of encouraged to stick in that way. And then there's the deviant role as well. The deviant is a solo role. The werewolves win if the townsfolk don't manage to eliminate one of them. The townsfolk win if they do manage to eliminate werewolves. And the deviant just wants an end to it all. The deviant wins if everyone votes and eliminates the deviant. So it's a really difficult role to play, to convince everyone that you're the werewolf or you deserve to die, but you're not really the werewolf because you're the deviant. But he operates as kind of a spoiler, and that role is really difficult to win with. And so we found that in terms of offering game rewards, things like achievements or trophies for the PlayStation, that particular role being so difficult, we offered a little more point reward for that one. Overall appreciation of the game started out pretty strong. We were pretty happy with this, but then after the course, and this is our appreciation over the course of 3 games, over the course of 6 games, we had players who were kind of on the fence actually decide, no, they really like it more than they had initially thought they did. And so here we've observed that as the players' familiarity with the game grew, so did their appreciation of it. And that stands to reason as well that the more the player felt that they had mastered the game, the more that they felt that they were able to influence things to their own desires, they liked it more. They felt like they had a greater sense of getting better at it. So we can see that over time that increased as well. The whisper usage. So overall, players, we saw kind of had to warm up to using the whispers. Whispers are a great way to share private information. I am the gossip, and I think that this player over here is the werewolf, but then requires a little give back from that other player, a little bit of trust, and we see that trust building over time. There are some risks to whispering in the game. If you whisper with a werewolf, the werewolf will sniff you and find out what role you are, so there's always some danger to whispering with people, but that kind of, we saw players willing to take that risk because it allowed them to kind of build coalitions. Interestingly, the US players whispered a lot more over the course of play than the French players did. The French players initially were introduced to the feature, tried it out a little bit, but then, I don't know, maybe the French are afraid of werewolves or something. So they are either an entirely guileless people, or we're just unable to perceive what masters of secrets they are. The game actions that I mentioned before, using the emotes to point or to indicate myself or to express frustration or to kind of cross your arms and be sort of surly, why are people doing this? We saw that players thought they were fun, a little bit less useful. The monologue feature, that ability to stand up and turn off all of the other VoIP for the other players, we found that players found that about equally fun and useful. And whispering as well. Whispering, I think, is interesting because players found it more useful than fun, but still roughly on par. So specifically that came out of the feedback, we saw 9 players out of the 24 in this one particular test. Players thought the emotes were fun, but they felt that they served no strategic purpose. And that was interesting to me that 9 different players chose that particular phrase, that they were forming strategies in their head. And while this social feature was kind of fun to do, they were always still kind of conniving. They were still thinking about, what's my next step here? It was less about the sharing the social space and more about using the social tools to convince others of what I'm trying to achieve. Also going back to that whispering column, whispering is used to communicate privately. But it's inherently useful, and so it's interesting to me to see it considered roughly as fun as it is useful, and I think probably some of that comes in just the enjoyment, that feeling of power of having a secret, that the things you and I are talking about, they don't know about, which lets me feel, and you feel, a little bit elevated. Specifically, going into the individual emotes, we had 4 emotes available at the time of the testing. We had pointing at others, so a very direct point. Whoever you look at, you point at, so it's very useful non-verbally to indicate one particular individual. We have this guy, so you know who should be elevated to the position of ringleader? This guy. My vote should count double. We have the exasperated, and we have the cross arms emotes. So pointing at others, obviously, was perceived very, very well by players, and they also considered it pretty fun. This guy, as well, a good way to indicate, do something for me. And then they fell off a little bit here in the crossing arms and exasperated because they didn't indicate who. I think that's what I'm taking away from this. So I was able to point to myself or point over there. So these were good ways to communicate non-verbally directly. And the other ones were more expressive, they were more comical, they were more used for punctuation than they were to indicate, if I'm a player who doesn't speak much, I can still be effective in the game by indicating, I think the werewolf is over here. So with all of that data in mind, with all of those observations that we've had, what were the takeaways? The first, I think, is that social VR is very foundational. You can't just throw some social elements in there. You can't just say, and we'll put guilds in there, or you can't just add a chat. You can't expect those sorts of secondary treatments to be very effective. For truly social VR, the interactions between the users have to be supported at the platform level. The game or the activity or whatever you're building is layered on top of that idea of shared space. When we all get together at my house to play games or to have this work conversation, we are first and foremost at my house. We're interacting with one another. We're sitting around the table. We are there together to play games, to talk about work, whatever. That idea of being together is paramount in social VR. Presence builds relatedness between players. Here, I think you want to reduce the barriers to participation, whether you're building a game or an application. Performing the actions in your game or application should be easy, familiar, intuitive. If you want players to lean, just track them leaning. They're going to do it anyway. Engage users by allowing them to relate to other people. And remember, these are other obvious actual people. These aren't bots. And they're sharing the virtual world with those people. But you also want to allow the user ways to, you want them to close off channels of communication, or if they feel threatened, you want to allow them to opt out of interactions with players. For example, in Werewolves Within, if I choose to mute a player, that will also turn off the animations for them. So even though I can't hear them, my attention won't be drawn back to them. Their negative influence on me will be turned off entirely. And finally, the activity providing the impetus to use the application or the game. It's the icebreaker, right? That idea of structured autonomy. We're going to go here to find the werewolf. We're going to go here to edit a wiki. We're going to go here to create a document. The structured autonomy gives a framework for what the players or the users are going to be communicating about. And so without this activity in place, without this common ground, without this item to pursue together, you're relying a lot more on the player's volition to say, notice me, take notice of me. If you're giving me the activity to do it, that's my opportunity to step in and say, of course, I'm the werewolf, or no, I'm definitely not the werewolf, as opposed to, hey, all, we're together now, let's talk about whatever it is that intrigues us. So that is pretty much my conclusion today. I want to thank you for being here. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to entertain those. We can do that either, I don't know what kind of time we're looking at. I feel like I sort of blazed through that. Oh no, I'm right on time. So feel free to come up and ask me questions, or if we still have a minute or two left, we don't know, someone wants to step up to the mic here. We have any questions for me?
Hey, I had a question about is the social aspect designed to be played with strangers over the internet, or how do you find people to play with, and did you experiment with that?
For someone like me who ends up going to a lot of shows and playing a lot of demos and playing with a lot of random people, I'm perfectly comfortable with it, but we assume that most players are probably going to be playing with their friends. And in fact, on a variety of services, like for example, if you're playing on the PlayStation VR, your PSN friends that you already have will be pushed to the top of the queue, so you can say, oh, I want to join Justin, or I want to invite him to a game. So we assume that most people will probably want to be playing with some number of friends. I didn't go too much into it in the data, but we did a couple of different tests there. The first test was groups of people and players who did not know one another at all. And then for the second test, we had multiple people in each session who did go into the game knowing each other beforehand and having pre-established relationships. And we found that there was almost a perfect accordance there of they were more willing up front to chat, to whisper, to perform these things that other players had to slowly warm up to. But really we look at this as an opportunity to... You can play the game with as few as 5 people or up to 8 people, and we will randomize any empty seats you have that you want filled additionally. So we figure that this is also a good place for you and 2 or 3 of your friends to start a session and bring a couple of random people in and hopefully make friends with them over the course of play there. You can play a private session. It doesn't have to be open to the public, or you can play a completely public randomized session. So we're offering players basically the opportunity to do whatever they feel most comfortable with.
So you said that you made it so that
Sure. We definitely want this to be, part of it starts at like literally a fundamental level of it's a cartoony sort of town and the characters are kind of comical. So there isn't a lot of gore, there isn't a lot of physical threat actually communicated in the environment itself. So the sort of lighthearted approach itself kind of steers players more toward that comical or lighthearted disposition anyway. We also have some social features whereby if you own the room that's the game is taking place in, you can kick out anyone that you don't want in it. If the players, if they don't know who owns the room or if it's randomly match made, players can initiate a kick vote. So if you're obviously cursing, threatening me, being awful, being whatever, I can initiate a kick vote, and with enough other players in agreement there, we can push you out of the room. Thereby you won't be able to make it back into that room. Also, we have the opportunity for players to mute other players. So if I just don't want to hear you, but I don't have the votes to get you out of the room, but I just don't want to play with you anymore, I can turn off your VoIP, and that will also prevent your animations from being played from my perspective. So I can still vote for you. You are still a presence there in the game, but you're unable to be as hostile to me personally. And we found that this actually tested fairly well because there are, in many cases, players who don't want to run the risk of, oh, Justin's being a real jerk, let's kick him out. They'll take a path of least resistance and just isolate that player from being able to interact with them, and that other player won't necessarily even know that they've been punished. We don't want to have this kind of negative karma system because that can often backfire, be used against players who aren't actually being disruptive. Instead, if you're being a real bother, I can just isolate you and not be affected by you at all. Other questions? Okay, that's actually a great question, and it kind of dovetails into this. One of the reasons that we aren't supporting the touch controllers is the fact that we don't want players to have that full free motion of hands. We don't want them doing their own lewd gestures, and so the gamepad really sits very comfortably in your hands and becomes very secondary. Most of the actions you're taking are done by looking around, or we'll press a button to open your book. The book contains information in the game, so you're actually turning your head to look at this sort of diegetic UI. Whenever you want to select something, you look at it and then just confirm with a button. So everything is basically one click away. We make some pretty good use of the gamepad controllers, and it never becomes primary. You never have to wrestle with the controller. It's always just kind of one tap. It doesn't care where it is spatially. Again, we're only reading the player's head and position. Wrap it up. I'm told to wrap it up here. So, yeah, it's feels very, very natural, very comfortable. So thank you for coming and attending, hearing me talk. I'll be up here to answer any other questions you have. Thank you.